We've had reports of shoplifting. Place your hands behind your back.
Excuse me? You have no reasonable suspicion to detain me.
Yeah? Well, I'm a police officer and I'm telling you to stop.
That's not how the Fourth Amendment works, officer.
Don't tell me how the law works, you're going to jail.
Officer Derek Mills had been on the force for 9 years when he made the decision that would end his career and cost the city $2.7 million. He was 38 years old, carrying 17 prior complaints for racial profiling and excessive force, yet somehow still convinced his badge made him untouchable. On a quiet Thursday afternoon at Riverside Valley Mall, he stopped a black woman carrying a shopping bag, demanded to search it without cause, and ignored her calm explanation of constitutional law. The handcuffs clicked shut around her wrists. 6 phones recorded every second. What Mills didn't know, what his arrogance wouldn't let him see, was that Jasmine Crawford wasn't just another shopper. She was a civil rights attorney who had destroyed 12 police careers before his. He thought he was making an arrest. He was actually creating the evidence for his own professional execution. Jasmine Crawford had built her reputation on making powerful institutions nervous. At 34, she had litigated 12 successful civil rights lawsuits against law enforcement agencies across 3 states, securing over $8 million in settlements for victims of police misconduct. Her specialty was Fourth Amendment violations and racial profiling, the precise intersection of constitutional law and systemic racism that most attorneys avoided. Police departments knew her name. Municipal legal teams dreaded seeing her business card. On January 25, 2024, she had no idea she was about to become her own client. The deposition had run late, and Riverside Valley Mall in suburban Ohio was her only option for finding a birthday gift for her niece before the stores closed. The Thursday afternoon crowd was sparse, the post-holiday lull leaving the gleaming corridors nearly empty. Jasmine browsed the department store's handbag section, selected a designer piece priced at $340, and completed the purchase with her credit card. The receipt was folded neatly into her purse alongside the shopping bag. She never noticed the 2 officers watching her. Officer Derek Mills and Officer Travis Kowalski were assigned to the mall as security liaisons, a contract position that gave them authority over the shopping center while technically keeping them on the city police payroll. Mills carried 17 prior complaints in his personnel file: excessive force, racial profiling, unlawful detention. None had resulted in discipline. Kowalski had 11 similar complaints. Together, they operated with the casual impunity of men who had never faced real consequences. They had marked Jasmine the moment she entered the store. A black woman in professional attire, browsing luxury items with confidence. It fit their unspoken profile. They didn't see her pay. They didn't verify anything. They simply watched and assumed. 20 feet from the mall exit, Mills stepped directly into her path. "Ma'am, I need you to stop right there." Jasmine looked up, confused. Mills's hand rested near his handcuffs. Kowalski positioned himself to her left, cutting off lateral movement. "We've had reports of shoplifting," Kowalski added. "We need to see what's in your bag." Jasmine's legal training activated instantly. She recognized the choreography of an unlawful stop, the blocking positions, the commanding tone, the manufactured justification. "Reports from who?" she asked evenly. "I just purchased this item. I have a receipt." "Then you won't mind showing us," Mills said, his voice hardening with the expectation of compliance. "Actually, I do mind. You have no reasonable suspicion to detain me. I'm leaving." She took 1 step forward. Mills grabbed her arm. The moment Mills's fingers closed around Jasmine's bicep, she stopped moving entirely. Years of representing clients in excessive force cases had taught her that sudden movements during unlawful police contact could be reframed as aggression, resistance, even assault. She knew that every word she spoke now, every gesture she made, would likely become evidence in whatever came next. "Officer, you are unlawfully detaining me," she said, her voice calm and precisely articulated. "I'm an attorney. I know my rights. You have no articulable reasonable suspicion that I've committed a crime." Mills smirked. It was an expression Jasmine had seen in depositions, in courtrooms, in body camera footage. The look of someone who believed the rules didn't apply to them. "Yeah? Well, I'm a police officer, and I'm telling you to stop. That's all the suspicion I need." "That's not how the Fourth Amendment works," Jasmine replied. She kept her hands visible at her sides, her posture deliberately non-threatening. "You're required to have specific, articulable facts suggesting criminal activity. Watching me walk through a mall isn't reasonable suspicion of anything." Kowalski stepped closer, narrowing the space around her. "Store security said they saw you concealing merchandise." The lie was so casual, so reflexive, that Jasmine almost admired its audacity. "Then call them over here," she said. "Let's hear exactly what they claim they saw." The two officers exchanged a glance. It lasted less than a second, but Jasmine caught it. The micro-expression of two people realizing they'd been caught in a fabrication. There was no store security. There had been no report. They had simply lied, and she had just forced them to acknowledge it without saying a word. "I paid for this item with my credit card 17 minutes ago," Jasmine continued. "I have a receipt in my purse. I'm going to retrieve it." "Don't reach for anything," Mills barked, his right hand moving toward his firearm. Jasmine froze. The absurdity of the moment crystallized around her. She was a civil rights attorney being threatened with deadly force for attempting to produce a shopping receipt. But she also understood, with the clarity that came from representing too many grieving families, that black people had been killed for far less threatening actions than reaching into a purse. "My receipt is in my purse," she said slowly, her voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. "I'm going to tell you exactly what I'm doing before I do it. I'm going to open my purse with my left hand. I'm going to remove the receipt. My movements will be slow and clearly visible to both of you." "Just give us the bag," Kowalski said. "No, that's an unconstitutional search. You have no warrant. I'm not giving consent. And you have no probable cause." Mills's face flushed red. "We can do this the easy way or the hard way, lady." Jasmine met his eyes directly. "There is no easy way to violate someone's constitutional rights, officer." What happened next would become Exhibit A in the federal lawsuit. Mills, his authority challenged and his ego wounded by a woman who refused to be intimidated, made the decision that would ultimately cost him his career. "Turn around, hands behind your back." "On what charge?" Jasmine asked. "Resisting arrest." The circular logic was so brazen that Jasmine almost laughed. "You can't arrest someone for resisting an unlawful arrest, officer. That's not legally valid." Mills didn't care about legal validity. He grabbed both of Jasmine's arms and wrenched them behind her back with unnecessary force. The shopping bag slipped from her grip and hit the polished floor with a muffled thud. Jasmine didn't resist. She went completely limp, allowing her body to become dead weight in Mills's grip. It was a technique she had taught dozens of clients. Never give them justification to escalate to violence. The handcuffs clicked shut around her wrists, tighter than necessary, the metal biting into her skin. Jasmine winced but made no sound. She was hyper-aware of everything now: the weight of the cuffs, the positioning of the officers, the growing crowd of mall patrons who had stopped to stare. She could see phones rising, cameras activating, witnesses documenting the encounter in real time. "You are making a catastrophic mistake," Jasmine said quietly, her voice steady despite the humiliation burning through her chest. "My name is Jasmine Crawford. I'm a civil rights attorney. I specialize in police misconduct cases, and you just committed an assault and false arrest on camera." Mills leaned close to her ear, his breath hot against her skin. "I don't care if you're the Queen of England. You're going to jail." Around them, the crowd had grown to nearly 20 people. A woman in her 60s held up her phone, recording everything. A young couple stood frozen near the food court entrance, their expressions horrified. A teenage employee from one of the clothing stores had abandoned his post to watch, his mouth slightly open in disbelief. Jasmine turned her head slightly, her voice rising just enough to carry to the witnesses. "I am being unlawfully arrested. I purchased merchandise legally. I have a receipt. These officers have no probable cause. Please continue recording." Kowalski shifted uncomfortably, finally beginning to grasp the magnitude of what was unfolding. But Mills was too deep in his own certainty to retreat. They paraded her through the mall like a trophy. Mills gripped Jasmine's upper arm, his fingers digging into the soft tissue hard enough to leave bruises that would be photographed later as evidence. Kowalski walked ahead, carrying her shopping bag with exaggerated care, as if it contained stolen goods rather than a legally purchased item with a receipt inside. The route they chose was deliberately public, through the main corridor instead of the service hallways, past the fountain and the directory, and the benches where elderly mall walkers rested between laps. Jasmine kept her head high. The humiliation was a physical sensation, a heat that spread from her chest to her face, but she refused to look down. She knew what this looked like to the white shoppers who stopped to stare and whisper behind their hands. A black woman in handcuffs, flanked by police officers, accused of theft. The narrative wrote itself in their minds before they knew any facts. She must have done something. Why else would she be arrested? The optics were deliberate. This wasn't just an arrest. It was a performance of power, a public shaming designed to punish her for refusing to submit. Mills wanted her to feel small, powerless, criminalized in front of strangers. He wanted her to understand that her attorney credentials, her professional success, her knowledge of constitutional law, none of it mattered when faced with his authority and his badge. But Jasmine had represented too many clients who had endured exactly this kind of ritualized humiliation. She recognized it for what it was, the last desperate assertion of dominance by someone who had already lost. They reached the mall security office, a windowless room behind the customer service desk. Mills pushed her into a plastic chair. Kowalski finally set the shopping bag on the desk and opened it with theatrical slowness. Inside was the designer handbag, tags still attached, price sticker visible. Kowalski pulled out the receipt and unfolded it. The timestamp showed 12:13 p.m., 17 minutes ago. The credit card transaction was clearly printed, along with the item description, price, and tax. Mills stared at the receipt. His jaw tightened. A muscle twitched near his left eye. Jasmine watched him process the reality of his error, watched him understand that he had just arrested someone for legally purchasing an item they could prove they'd paid for. Instead of admitting the mistake, he doubled down. "This could be fake," Mills muttered, his voice lacking conviction. "Call the store," Jasmine said calmly. "Verify the transaction. I'll wait." Mills didn't call. He couldn't, because verification would only confirm what he already knew. Instead, he crossed his arms. "You're still under arrest for resisting." "I never resisted. I went limp. There are 12 witnesses and at least 6 video recordings of the entire encounter. You're compounding your liability with every second you keep me in these handcuffs." Lieutenant Maria Donovan had been a police officer for 22 years, long enough to recognize a disaster when she saw one. The radio call had been vague. Situation at the mall, supervisor requested. But the moment she walked into the security office and saw Jasmine Crawford in handcuffs with a valid receipt on the desk in front of her, she understood exactly what had happened. She also recognized Jasmine's name from the business card Mills had mentioned over the radio. Crawford had sued the department in the next county over and won a six-figure settlement. Her firm had a reputation for being thorough, aggressive, and expensive. "Uncuff her," Donovan said immediately. "Lieutenant, she was—" Mills started. "Now." The single word carried the weight of an order that could not be negotiated. Mills fumbled with his keys, his hands shaking slightly as he unlocked the handcuffs. They came away with a metallic click, revealing angry red marks encircling both of Jasmine's wrists. Donovan noted them silently, already calculating the photographic evidence that would appear in the inevitable lawsuit. She pulled Mills and Kowalski into the hallway, just out of Jasmine's earshot, but not out of sight. The conversation lasted 90 seconds. Donovan's body language was rigid with barely controlled anger, her voice low but sharp. Mills gestured defensively, trying to explain. Kowalski looked like he wanted to sink through the floor. When Donovan finished, both officers had the distinct pallor of men who understood they had made a career-ending mistake. Donovan returned to the office and faced Jasmine with the careful neutrality of someone trying to minimize departmental liability. "Ms. Crawford, I apologize for this incident. There was clearly a misunderstanding regarding—" "There was no misunderstanding," Jasmine interrupted, her voice sharp enough to cut. She stood, rubbing her wrists where the handcuffs had bitten into skin. "Your officers racially profiled me from the moment I entered that store. They detained me without reasonable suspicion. They fabricated a report from store security that doesn't exist. They conducted an illegal search of my property. And then they arrested me for an offense I didn't commit in order to cover their mistake. This wasn't a misunderstanding, Lieutenant. This was a systematic violation of my civil rights." Donovan's professional mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the calculation beneath. She was already thinking about internal investigations, media coverage, and potential litigation costs. "We'll conduct a full investigation." "I'm sure you will," Jasmine said, "but I'm conducting my own. I'll be filing a federal lawsuit under Section 1983 for unlawful detention, false arrest, and violation of my 4th and 14th Amendment rights. I'll be requesting all body camera footage, all radio transmissions, and the personnel files of both officers under discovery." She pulled a business card from her purse and handed it to Donovan. "I assume you recognize the firm." Donovan did. It was one of the most successful civil rights litigation firms in the Midwest. Their trial record was nearly spotless. Jasmine didn't leave the mall quietly. She stood in the parking lot under the cold January sun and gave interviews to 3 local news stations that had arrived after word of the incident spread across social media. The reporters had seen the videos. Everyone had seen the videos by now. Witness footage from 6 different phones had been uploaded to Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok within minutes of the arrest. By the time Jasmine walked out of the mall 2 hours later, the videos had collectively accumulated over 2 million views. The footage was devastating in its clarity. There was Jasmine, calm and articulate, explaining Fourth Amendment protections while Mills grew increasingly aggressive. There was the moment Mills grabbed her arm, the moment he handcuffed her, the moment he marched her through the mall. The shopping bag with the receipt visible on the floor appeared in 3 separate videos. Multiple recordings captured audio of Jasmine clearly stating she was an attorney, that she did not consent to the search, that the arrest was unlawful. The narrative that crystallized on social media was simple and damning. Civil rights attorney illegally arrested for shopping while black. By 6 p.m., the police chief had issued a carefully worded statement promising a thorough and impartial investigation. By midnight, the mayor had called for an independent review by an outside agency. By the following morning, the story had been picked up by national news outlets. News outlets ran it during their morning broadcasts. Major national newspapers published an article. Legal analysts appeared on cable news to explain why the arrest appeared to violate clearly established constitutional law. But Jasmine wasn't interested in media coverage alone. 72 hours after the arrest, she filed a comprehensive federal lawsuit in the United States District Court. The complaint was 47 pages long, meticulously detailed, and named 4 defendants: Officer Derek Mills, Officer Travis Kowalski, the city of Riverside Valley, and the police department itself. The lawsuit alleged violations of the Fourth Amendment's protection against unreasonable search and seizure, violations of the 14th Amendment's guarantee of equal protection under the law, assault and battery, false imprisonment, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and municipal liability for failure to train and supervise officers with known histories of misconduct. The damages requested were unspecified but substantial. The case number was assigned. The clock started ticking. And across the city, in the police department's legal office, attorneys began the grim work of assessing just how much this was going to cost. Discovery in civil rights litigation is where careers end and institutional failures become public record. Jasmine's legal team filed requests for every piece of documentation related to the incident, to the officers involved, and to the department's policies on racial profiling and use of force. The body camera footage arrived first. It was worse than the witness videos. The recording began before Mills and Kowalski approached Jasmine, capturing their conversation as they watched her shop. "Keep an eye on her," Mills said, his voice casual. Kowalski responded with a non-committal sound, but neither officer articulated any specific behavior that justified surveillance. They watched her browse. They watched her select an item. They didn't watch her pay. Mills was checking his phone when Jasmine completed the transaction at the register. The footage captured Mills fabricating the store security report. It captured him physically grabbing Jasmine without legal justification. It captured every word of her clear, repeated statements that she did not consent to a search. It captured Mills threatening her with his firearm when she reached for her receipt. It captured the entire arrest, the walk through the mall, the moment in the security office when Kowalski found the valid receipt, and Mills claimed it might be fake. The footage was a prosecutor's nightmare and a civil rights attorney's dream. The personnel files came next. Mills had 17 prior complaints spanning 9 years: excessive force, racial profiling, unlawful detention, discourtesy, and abuse of authority. 4 complaints specifically alleged he had targeted black citizens without justification. None had resulted in discipline beyond verbal counseling. Internal emails revealed that supervisors had flagged Mills as a liability risk 3 years earlier but had taken no corrective action. Kowalski's file contained 11 complaints, with a similar pattern of alleged racial bias and aggressive behavior. The city's legal department files were perhaps most damaging. They revealed 3 previous racial profiling lawsuits involving Mills, all settled quietly with confidentiality agreements that prevented the details from becoming public. The city had paid a combined $230,000 to make those cases disappear. Each settlement agreement included a clause preventing the plaintiffs from discussing the circumstances of their encounters with Mills. The department had known for years that Mills was a lawsuit waiting to happen. They had paid to keep it quiet rather than address the problem. The depositions were surgical. Mills's attorney attempted to invoke qualified immunity, the legal doctrine that shields officers from liability unless they violate clearly established constitutional rights. But the case law was unambiguous. Arresting someone without probable cause violated clearly established Fourth Amendment protections. Multiple Supreme Court decisions confirmed it. When Mills was asked to articulate what specific facts had given him reasonable suspicion to detain Jasmine, he struggled. She looked suspicious, he finally said. What about her appearance made her suspicious? Jasmine's attorney pressed. Mills hesitated. She was lingering near expensive items. Browsing in a department store made her suspicious. She just had a look about her. Can you describe this look? Mills couldn't. The subtext was obvious to everyone in the room. The trial began on a Tuesday morning in October, 9 months after the arrest. The federal courthouse in downtown Cincinnati was packed with reporters, activists, and curious observers who had followed the case through the news cycle. Jasmine sat at the plaintiff's table with her legal team, composed and professional in a navy suit. Across the aisle, Mills and Kowalski sat with the city's attorneys, their expressions carefully blank. The trial lasted 6 days. The plaintiff's case was built on the foundation of irrefutable evidence, body camera footage, witness testimony, personnel records, and expert analysis. A former police chief testified about reasonable suspicion standards and explained why Mills's articulated reasons for the stop failed to meet constitutional requirements. A constitutional law professor walked the jury through Fourth Amendment jurisprudence, making clear that the law governing unlawful detention was well established and unambiguous. The defense attempted to argue that Mills and Kowalski had acted reasonably based on training and experience. Their use of force expert claimed the arrest was within policy guidelines, but the body camera footage undermined every defense argument. The jury watched Jasmine calmly explaining the law, while Mills grew increasingly aggressive. They watched him lie about store security. They watched him handcuff a woman for the crime of legally purchasing a handbag. Jasmine testified on the 4th day. She described the humiliation of being handcuffed and paraded through the mall, the physical pain of the too tight restraints, the psychological impact of being criminalized for shopping. She detailed the assumptions people made when they saw a black woman in police custody, the way their eyes judged her before knowing any facts. She spoke about her niece asking why Auntie Jasmine had been arrested, about explaining racial profiling to a 7-year-old child who wanted to understand why police would hurt someone they were supposed to protect. Her testimony was devastating in its quiet precision. The defense cross-examination attempted to suggest Jasmine had been uncooperative, that a simple willingness to show her receipt would have resolved everything. Jasmine's response was immediate. The Fourth Amendment doesn't require cooperation with an unconstitutional search. My willingness to assert my rights doesn't justify their violation of those rights. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. When they returned, the verdict was unanimous on all counts. Mills and Kowalski had violated Jasmine Crawford's constitutional rights through racial profiling, unlawful detention, and false arrest. The compensatory damages for emotional distress, humiliation, and civil rights violations totaled $1,200,000. The punitive damages, designed specifically to punish the defendants and deter future misconduct, added another $1,500,000. The total, $2.7 million. Jasmine sat motionless as the verdict was read, her expression controlled. But those who knew her saw the slight release of tension in her shoulders, the faint exhale of vindication. TT. The verdict triggered consequences that rippled through every level of the system that had enabled Mills and Kowalski's misconduct. Officer Derek Mills was terminated 7 days after the jury returned its decision. The termination letter cited violations of departmental policy, constitutional violations, and conduct unbecoming an officer. More significantly, because the termination was classified as for cause related to documented misconduct, Mills forfeited a portion of his pension benefits, specifically those tied to years of service during which complaints had been filed but ignored. Officer Travis Kowalski was fired 3 days later. Both officers were decertified by the State Law Enforcement Standards Board, a permanent mark that prevented them from working in any law enforcement capacity within Ohio. The decertification would follow them to any other state where they might seek police employment. The police chief, whose department had ignored 17 complaints against Mills and paid to settle previous lawsuits rather than address the pattern of behavior, resigned under pressure from the city council. His resignation letter cited personal reasons. Everyone understood the truth. The mayor, facing intense public pressure and the prospect of further litigation, established a civilian oversight board with subpoena power and independent investigative authority. The board would review all complaints of police misconduct, with the power to recommend discipline up to and including termination. For the first time, the community would have meaningful oversight of the officers who patrolled their streets. The city implemented mandatory implicit bias training for all sworn officers, revised use of force policies to emphasize de-escalation, and created an early intervention system to flag officers with patterns of complaints before they escalated to lawsuits. The Internal Affairs Division was restructured to report directly to the Civilian Oversight Board rather than the police chief. The mall terminated its contract with the police department and hired a private security firm with stricter accountability measures and better training protocols. Jasmine used $400,000 of her settlement to establish a legal defense fund for victims of police misconduct who lacked the resources to pursue litigation. The fund would provide free legal representation, expert witnesses, and investigative support. In its first year, it took on 14 cases. Her legal practice continued, her credibility and national profile higher than ever. She appeared on panel discussions about police reform, testified before state legislative committees considering accountability legislation, and authored an op-ed in the Washington Post about the systemic failures that allowed officers like Mills to operate with impunity for years. The viral videos remained online, permanent documentation of the encounter. They had been viewed over 15 million times across platforms. In the comments, people shared their own stories of being profiled, detained, humiliated. The videos became evidence not just in Jasmine's case, but in the broader national conversation about racial bias in policing. Mills and Kowalski disappeared from public life. Neither gave interviews. Neither issued apologies. They simply ceased to exist in the profession they had used to harass and humiliate citizens who didn't match their assumptions about who belonged in public spaces. In the end, Jasmine Crawford didn't just win her lawsuit. She dismantled a system that had protected bad officers, exposed an institution that had prioritized liability management over accountability, and created lasting change that would benefit everyone who came after her. The story became a case study in law schools, a training scenario in police academies, and a warning. Choose your targets carefully, because sometimes the person you profile knows the law better than you do. And sometimes, justice isn't just served. It's delivered with precision, documented with receipts, and paid for in millions.